Hi everyone, welcome. Thank you all so much for waiting very patiently. We've just had oh wait, currently we're remaining to have a slight technical issue with my co-host joining. But what we'll do, we'll gradually make a start and hopefully I'll make a very glamorous late entrance shortly. But yeah, thank you all so much for being here. So my name's Hayley, just to quickly introduce myself. I'm the training director at PMAC. And essentially what we do is we create like bespoke trainings for businesses on anything that relates to mental health and wellbeing. And this webinar today is the final webinar in a series that we've been doing in collaboration with ECS. So Nigel, who's going to be joining us, works at ECS, and ECS do an awful lot of work in the automotive industry to support businesses to help make things more efficient, more seamless. And one of the benefits of that, I suppose, is that it makes working life hopefully much more easy for the staff working in the automotive industry. So we've come together to put together this series. Like I said, this is the final session in the series. The others have been recorded. You can watch them back. Those are shorter. There's a couple of 30-minute sessions and a 45-minute session, all designed with the aim of like being able to offer something to the automotive industry to help support the mental health and well-being of those working within it. It's a very challenging industry to be in, from what we understand, having worked with ECS. So today's session is more aimed towards managers, and it is really about helping you to be able to recognise any overwhelming employees that might indicate they're starting to struggle with the mental health or are struggling. And we're going to be thinking about how you can support your employees if they are struggling, essentially. So what we want you to take away from this, you aren't going to come away from this session feeling like an expert in mental health. We're not going into all the ins and outs of loads of different types of conditions, but what we do hope you'll feel is a little bit more confident to recognize, to approach people if you are concerned about them, and to feel a little bit more confident to do that and to have conversations to hopefully support them moving forward. So throughout the session, we do have little opportunities to interact and engage. Um, we are going to use like these little polls instead. You're also more than welcome to use the chat. However, the session is being recorded, so you've automatically had your cameras turned off and you've been muted, just for your own privacy, really. But just before we go any further then, how do we think if I were to ask all of you who are here today, and just to make you aware the responses are anonymous, it just comes up as like a word cloud. How do we think our mental health might impact our ability to perform when we're at work? And there's kind of no right or wrong. For example, with these, it's really about just your perspective, your opinion, based on your experiences, really. So yeah, so just why might work impact our mental health, potentially for the more negative, it says. So immediately we've had concentration. So yes, so you might find that people struggle to concentrate. They might end up making mistakes. They're forgetful potentially. They might avoid doing certain tasks. They might end up sick. Perfect. Yeah, people might end up off work. They might become really stressed. They might feel overwhelmed much more quickly than usual. We might sometimes see responses that don't seem like they massively fit the situation and what happened. Or we might see that sometimes people seem like they don't really respond to an awful lot, to be quite honest, and it doesn't seem to impact them very much. They don't seem like they care quite as much. Concentration impacted, pressured environment, absolutely, that's going to make things significantly more difficult. Perfect. So loads and loads of things in there. So we've got the already dealing with people behind the scenes. There's the stress, make you sick, feeling overwhelmed in that busy, pressured environment. So yeah, it can be all sorts of things. It might impact performance. When we're struggling with our mental health, it can impact the way that we see not only ourselves, but like the people around us. So it can impact like your relationships with your colleagues, with your managers, for example. It can impact the way that they communicate. You might stop kind of being as involved, might notice people be more snappy, for example. So one of the signs of depression, for example, is actually being irritable and being angry much more quickly. which is slightly different to what people often expect. And, you know, when people often think of like sadness, so we might be more likely to see people struggling to remain in work. So work can significantly impact our mental health, both for the better and for the detriment. So it can make it more challenging to you know, manage stresses as they arise, to deal with any anxieties that, you know, might face, particularly if you're going into those busy periods like in March and September. People might feel very, very sensitive to any sort of perceived criticism. Even if you just feel like you're giving useful feedback, people might be much more sensitive to that if they're struggling with the mental health. They might become really, really aware of how other people are interacting with them. And as much as they might withdraw sometimes, they might also then feel like they aren't as part of the team and worry that they're being excluded, for example. But also when we think about like the automotive industry and the fact that you're operating such massive machines almost, and lots of, you know, working very technically with lots of machinery, like actually that struggling to concentrate and to focus and to kind of get out of your head really can ultimately also sometimes put us at risk of like physical injury, for example. So why might it be particularly important to think about the mental health of people working in the automotive industry? Well, you might be aware of Ben, the charity that offers mental health support to people who are already struggling with their mental health. They did a study that came out last year that found like 1 in 3 people working in the automotive industry struggle with their mental health and can attribute work to having had a direct impact on that. And when we compare that to like the average, you know, elsewhere, like in other industry, that's more like 1 in 6. So you're actually more like twice more likely to struggle with your mental health if you're working in the automotive industry. And the biggest causes of you know, or the biggest things that were attributed to those difficulties were things like stress and sleep and mood and anxiety and struggling to relax, for example. And there are lots and lots of things associated with that. You know, it is a very, very high pressure, fast paced, busy environment. You might experience physical aches and pains much more because of the physicality of the work and the risk of injury. Also, it can be quite an overstimulating environment with lots of noise and smells and people. So there are lots of challenges, I suppose, then that do come specifically with working in the automotive industry that mean that we need to be even more mindful of the impact that we have as managers on the employees, for example. So just from your perspectives then, what challenges do you think come specifically with working in the automotive industry that people might not get elsewhere? Because there are many of them, and this is exactly why we've worked with ECS to put these webinars together that do have, you know, all those of you working in this industry in mind. So yeah, so what challenges from your perspective do you face working in the industry? And yeah, we shall see what people have to say. So we've got straight away the people. So yes, that might be dealing with customers, that might be dealing with different departments and needing, you know, each department to do their bit in, you know, in the time frame that you need it to be done to be able to do your work. The noise, the climate. Oh, noise has come up a couple of times now. Perfect. Deadlines. So yes, so maybe having to work quite quickly. And there might be quite tight deadlines. There might be like a really quick turnaround and lots of pressure. Perfect. So yeah, so some of the things that we come up with ECS were things like, you know, having to work to different standards based on like, you know, if you're a garage that deals with different manufacturers, for example, they might, all of those manufacturers might require you to work to different standards, and you're constantly having to change your hat and remember what's required of you all the time, changing your ways of working. Lots of, you know, people report like a lack of control as well over what's expected of you day to day. It is a very technical line of work. There is an awful lot of detail involved. It's a very male dominated environment as well. There's an awful lot of pressure. As we've said, it can be really overstimulating. Hi, Nigel.
So sorry for being
You
late.
with us? No, not at
Technology
all.
is a wonderful thing
When it works.
when it works. Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah,
Sorry
no,
about that,
thank you.
everybody.
No, not at all. Thank you for joining us. I did make a start knowing that you'd be here shortly, but you've come just at the right time. We're just talking about the challenges that come specifically with working in this industry. So we've had things come up like the noise, the climate, whether that's the heat or, the cold all the time, deadlines, the people, the customers, banter, perfect. So
Yeah.
one of the things that we were just about to talk about is that pressure as well to, maintain that kind of stereotypical male bravado, and yeah, sometimes that can cross a line at times, and be at risk of kind of causing offense and actually hurting people quite a lot, which might mean they don't feel as comfortable and safe then going into work essentially. But yeah, lots and lots of challenges. And all of these things, like you said, can impact people's mental health, particularly longer term, like long-term stress can massively impact our self-esteem and self-worth, and it make everything much more challenging, which will then also impact the business. So it's really important as managers, as senior managers, to be aware of like the impact that the environment and the ways of working might be impacting all the individuals essentially. It can lead to inefficiency, people not working properly, or not working very well, struggling to follow procedures, people making mistakes, which might cost a lot of money. You might then see challenges, like you said, with people not being able to face coming into work and being off work, or coming into work when actually they're not able to. We see presenteeism. We might be more likely to see like complaints from customers and damage to reputation. And all of those things are, challenging enough, without then also thinking about the fact that we're thinking quite broadly at the minute about the industry. We're not even considering, the fact that different garages and different factories will have their own kind of subcultures and experience their own challenges, and there'll be challenges within different teams, let alone with individuals, for example. So we put this session together, like we said, because it is really, really important that we as managers and as leaders do what we can to support our teammates. There's been studies that have found like managers can impact an employee's mental health even more than a doctor or a therapist, and as much as a spouse. So we need to also be mindful of like how we're looking after ourselves. If we are tense, we're not looking after our own selves, our own mental health, we're stressed up to our eyeballs, we're storming about, there's a very good chance that we're going to unintentionally impact the people around us. We also need to think about, how we're talking to our employees, and, whether we're noticing that people over time maybe aren't showing as much enthusiasm anymore. People might look to you for that source of support. But ultimately, it is normal for our mental health to fluctuate. It does kind of ebb and flow throughout the course of our lives, like whether it's all the small things day to day that kind of build up, or we've had massive life events that might be impacting us, like our physical health. If you're in physical pain all the time, or you're physically unwell, you are more likely to feel low and experience anxiety, for example. So if we know even that people are in physical pain with the back, for example, they've got repetitive strain injury because of the work, that's something to be mindful of it and to keep on top of. And it is really important because, as a very male dominated industry, there are risks associated with that. There are risks, particularly for men. Like there's been research that shows that men or boys, when we're being brought up, when we're being socialized, like parents don't tend to talk about emotions as much to small boys as they do small girls, for example. And as adults, we know that we're feeling anxious because we've been told over time repeatedly that, oh, those feelings, like that maybe feeling sick and the butterflies in your tummy and sweating, oh, maybe that's because you've got this test in school today. That means, that's anxiety, and this is what we can do about it. So what we can see is that, men don't always have the same understanding of like their emotions and the things that influence them, and they don't always have the same ability to like talk about it in the same way and actually name it. They're not as experienced at doing that. That in itself can create more anxiety. They don't always have the same skills and to manage them as the building. And so sometimes men can see the fact that they're struggling as a reflection more so on them, rather than understanding that given the circumstances and the challenges they're facing, it's kind of understandable, and it's, it might even be normal. So work can impact us, like we've said, for the positive and for the negative. But it is important to highlight the benefits, I suppose, of being in work, and particularly again of working in this industry. It's not all challenging. So first of all, like, why might work be a positive thing for our mental health? As much as ideally we'd all live a life of luxury where we're not having to go into work, I'm sure, and we can just sit at home and have money present itself to us, and we all have a nice life of luxury without having to get up in the morning and go out in the winter. What is it about work that might be good for our mental health, do we think? And there can be, again, loads and loads of factors. So we've got home stress, perfect. So actually work can be a really, really good break from stresses at home. It can be a distraction, absolutely. It can you can get completely absorbed in your work. Structure and routine, brilliant. Um, Sometimes some people think of like routine and predictability is almost like the opposite of anxiety because it's so predictable. We know what's expected of us. We know what's coming next. We know how we're likely to feel this time in an hour when we've done this thing. It gives us a sense of normality. We can be around others, perfect, socializing. We're always saying like we're social creatures. We are evolved to be in tribes where we've got a role and a purpose and we're around other people all the time. When we're stressed, we don't immediately jump into that fight, flight, freeze response. Like our first instinct is to just talk to other people. Like there's a hormone called oxytocin that we get. It's often thought of like the cuddle hormone. It's a thing that we release more of when we feel close to other people. That's also triggered when we're stressed. Like actually our first instinct is to go to other people, to be around other people, to talk to them. If we're able to do that and we feel supported and accepted, we're less likely to feel stressed. So yeah, so even just that being around other people can be beneficial. So it can offer that accountability, that purpose, a sense of belonging, also get a sense of achievement as well. Like when we do a job well, for example, that can actually be really, really positive for our self-esteem. It can make things an awful lot better. It can improve our kind of ability to see ourselves in a positive light more generally. And then even when things go wrong day to day, the little things happen, generally we might feel like actually I'm still a decent and worthwhile, useful person. So thinking then more specifically about the automotive industry, why might working in this industry specifically be a positive for your mental health, do we think? And Nigel, you might have some insights into this as well, from all your experience. Like what kind of things about being in this industry do you think are actually quite useful for people's mental health?
It's because every day is different. There's so many different challenges
Yeah,
coming towards yourself, so you're getting that variety all the time. You're not just stuck in a rut, and that makes a big difference. So from one
yeah,
minute to the next, you don't know what's going to be facing you. It's very fast-paced environment,
yeah,
especially the after-sales side. And as long as you've got structure there, you
yeah.
can find the right path and being able to help anybody. But it's always coming at you at quite a fast pace.
Yeah, absolutely. So, lots of people do benefit from being in a
Mm,
fast-paced environment. Like,
yeah.
not everyone's good with just kind of being sat still at a desk. Like, so if you're someone who does better in a fast-paced environment, you're able to think quick on your feet, you find it energizing, then perfect. This might go really, really, this line of work might align really, really well with you. You can get a sense of pride in your work, perfect. The team working and like-minded people came up a couple of times. So there's that sense of working together towards something. I love that pride in your work as well. It's really, really important on
It
that.
is.
Yeah. And so, yeah, so it might be things like actually, as much as there's a big workload, like what we're then getting is more opportunities to have a job well done and like more opportunities for a sense of achievement rather than if, you're always doing like real big project work, for example. It's good if you like being busy. Like Nigel said, like it's different all the time. You never know
It
what
is.
you're going to get. So you're not going to get bored, I don't
No, definitely
imagine.
not. No, definitely not.
Um, if you like cars, again, like actually that might help to motivate you and to help you to feel more energized and feel more positive day to day. If you're doing something that you genuinely are interested in, you like to learn more about, you can get all sorts of skills working in the industry. There's so many different roles you can work in so many different areas of the industry. Um, and yeah, like I suppose if you're working in sales, for example, you might get opportunities to like top up your salary, for example. So that might help you to feel more in control of your finances. So there's definitely some benefits that can come. And it's important when we're thinking about, mental health that we don't only ever look at the things that go wrong, but we look for these things that we call protective factors, these things that help to protect us from struggling with our mental health. And we take these things that are already there, that are in place, even down to like people's individual skills and strengths. And we really, really try to emphasize those and build on those as much as we can, rather than just looking for things going wrong. So if we're able to look at the processes and just the ways of
Yeah.
working even, and how they might be even just like small things that might get overlooked, that we do because that's the way we've always done it. Sometimes it's the accumulation of those things that just add a slight extra bit of challenge and a bit more stress than is necessary day to day to day, that can impact people's mental health. So just looking at how we are working day to day and doing our best to make it as effective and as streamlined and as effective as possible, essentially, can be useful in itself to help support your team in their mental health. We can then think about improving like awareness of mental health and like having more conversations. We can also look at upskilling people like managers to be able to feel confident to try to support staff and have conversations with them about their mental health. And ultimately, that kind of combination can help improve the outcomes for your businesses. Like if your staff are happy and they're healthy and they feel confident and they feel trusted to do their job and they feel safe, not just physically, but they feel safe to be able to be open with you if they are feeling overwhelmed, if there are challenges, for example, they're much more likely to stay and bring enthusiasm to the team, and really, really kind of boost morale overall, which generally improves the business. So all of these things have benefits individually, but then also more broadly. So when we've been working with ECS throughout these sessions, we've been thinking about processes, accountability, and communication. Three things that we believe can just make things a little bit easier. And we can use this like a bit of a framework to improve things if we do notice areas for improvement. So we can look at processes in terms of the ways of working, and whether they just generally are making everyone's life more difficult unnecessarily. And again, people like ECS are there to help look at those things slightly differently and do things differently, which might help support your staff. But then also, like, actually, what processes are in place? Do people know that they can go to you as a manager if they're struggling with the mental health? Can they go to HR? Do you have mental health first aiders? Do you have an employee assistance program? Do they know where to get support if they need it? The accountability. So that's for both parties. So for them as individuals, there will be an expectation almost on them to do what they can to look after themselves. There is only so much you're able to do as a manager, but also where there is opportunities for you to support people, it's important that you also hold yourself accountable to do your absolute best with the skills that you have to support them. And communication. So, like, actually, am I only ever having conversations with people when something's gone wrong and I'm having to draw their attention to something? Do I routinely look at all the things that they've done well, the skills that they have? What kind of things do we talk about? Is it only ever about work? Do I ever just check in with people in terms of how they are? The more that people feel like you also see the things that they do well, and you see them as a whole person, not just an employee, and you're able to communicate those things to them, the more they're going to trust you, the safer they're going to feel, kind of having these conversations with you. Um, and ultimately, the more likely you are to find out about problems as they're emerging when they feel more manageable and when it feels easier to do something about them, rather than people then becoming very, very unwell, for example. And you then, when you're having these conversations, feeling completely overwhelmed yourself, which is, would be understandable.
Mhm.
So, what can we do? We can do our absolute best as much as we can to prevent stress where possible, whether it's through looking at ways of working, whether it's because we know that there's going to be a busy period coming up, for example, like in September and March at the new registration period. We have also, I know I've touched on the fact this is part of a series. We've already done a 30-minute session, I think that one was, on preventing stress. Like if we know that stress is coming, if we know that somebody's gone off sick and you might be off for a long period of time, and so there might be pressure on the teams, for example, for an extended period, like we can be aware of stress and prevent it where possible and do things to help manage our response to those situations. We can also do our best to recognize changes in our teams, in our employees, that might indicate that they're starting to struggle, or that they are struggling more than maybe we had noticed, for example. It's not always as obvious. People do a very, very, very good job at hiding things and masking things, unfortunately. And where we do
True.
recognize things, um, being able to support them as best as we can, whether that is through, again, training and even just attending this session today. Hopefully you might feel a little bit better able and equipped to do that. And again, kind of that process is being aware of like what processes are in place to support staff. Are there reasonable adjustments that can be made to help keep them in work during this challenging time, for example? We can do our absolute best, like, again, bearing in mind that there are limits to your role as a manager. You can't and shouldn't be expected to be somebody's therapist then, and to know what to say and to do the right thing and to just remove any sort of stress possible in work and take everything away, because it's not doable, it's not realistic, it's also not helpful, it's quite disempowering. Like, if actually you're struggling with anxiety and you're worrying about your ability to do things, you share that with the manager and then they immediately take all those things away from you, that might feel like confirmation that Nigel also thinks that I'm not capable of doing this, because why else would he have removed it from me so quickly? So we have to be mindful that we can't just, like we said, the second we know that somebody's struggling or is stressed or is anxious, just remove absolutely everything from them. Because again, then they also don't get the opportunity to be accountable themselves and to do their best to kind of face these things in a way that's manageable and get that sense of achievement even. But also there are things that you can do. And again, we'll do our absolute best to do that. And we'll look at communicating the best that we can. So avoiding a problem, if, for example, because you're anxious about saying the wrong thing or making things worse, for example, can just make things much more difficult for that individual and also for you. You then avoiding them, they're likely to pick up on the fact that you're not communicating with them as much. And that might then add to their worries and their stresses and make them feel even more uncomfortable coming into work or feel even lower. You might then also feel low in yourself, or your self-esteem might be impacted if you think, I know that I probably should do something, but I don't know what to do. So, and now I feel guilty that I'm avoiding them, for example. So avoidance helps no one, and it can keep problems going quite significantly. One thing we want you to understand is that when you focus too much on saying the right thing and making sure that um yeah, you just say something that's going to help, that's going to fix it, that's going to make things better, what that actually does is it makes us much more focused on ourselves and how I'm feeling and what I'm going to say. We stop listening quite so well, because as Nigel's starting a sentence, I'm already in my head trying to finish it and think what he's going to say and where this is going. And I'm thinking in advance about what I'm going to say. And I might be so quick to jump in and kind of interrupt him even and talk over him. And actually, that can make people feel like you're not actually really listening. And it can make it less likely that they're going to be honest with you about how things are going. Whereas actually, if all we try to do is understand rather than say the right thing, if there was just a right thing to say, people would go to a doctor once, a therapist once, and they wouldn't need to go back because it had
Mm.
just been said there and then and job done. It's not likely, it's not realistic. And actually, we can really, really underestimate the power of just listening and doing our best to show that we're trying to understand and empathizing with people. And also, the more we then think about saying the right thing, the more stress you're going to feel and the more anxious you're going to feel. That's a hell of a lot of pressure to be under. So, all we want to do is to feel confident, to be able to check in without focusing on saying the right thing, but just focusing on understanding, which actually makes it much more likely that you will say something that is genuinely a bit more comforting and useful. So we've created this little framework that's kind of summarized by like MOT, just because that might be easier for you to remember. It might be something that kind of sticks in the back of your mind, I suppose, rather than throwing a load of things at you that then it's just overwhelming and it's impossible to remember all these things. So hopefully MOT is something that will be quite easy for you to remember. And all that stands for is, first of all, just making a note of any changes, just kind of making a mental note, maybe writing it down, whatever it is, just being aware of changes in other people, and being conscious of that, not just kind of dismissing it, overlooking it, thinking, oh, they'll be fine tomorrow. Oh, it's just been a busy week. We'll just gloss over that. We'll ignore it. They'll be all right. It'll pass. Like being really aware of that, making a mental note of that almost. We want to open up conversations about people and how they actually are and how they're feeling without judgment. And then what we want to do is think together. So again, we both hold some sort of accountability in this. There's going to be parts that they have to play, but then also there might be things that I try to do as a manager to support them, for example. So, like we said, we are starting first of all by just making a note of any sort of changes. So, what kind of changes do you think you might observe in other people then, if they are struggling? And we've already kind of touched on this earlier, but what kind of things might you recognize in other people? What kind of things might you see in them, for example? And Nigel, again, you might have some insights here from your experience
Yeah, when you're walking
in
around
the
and you're
industry.
talking to people, you get people that are snappy. They're quite quick to react. A bit like
Yeah,
what you were saying earlier, they're quite quick to come in with an opinion without listening to what the actual issue is. And it might
yeah,
be a small thing which is causing a major problem. So it's just having
absolutely.
that ability to just say, just take a breath, have a listen, then we'll discuss. So
Yeah,
yeah,
absolutely. So the snappiness, the way they're interacting, also how much they're interacting. They might not be engaging with people anywhere
very
near as
quiet.
much as they used to. Yeah. And they might kind of have all the reasons and excuses to do that. Um, they might also avoid you as a manager. They might really, really try to avoid having conversations with you. And every time you try to talk to them, they seem busy. Oh, I'm just in the middle of this. Oh, I'll catch you later, for example. Not listening is really, really good. So that can be the result of a few things, really. So it might appear that they're not taking information in, like they're not kind of present enough to really hear it and absorb it and to be able to use it and remember it. It might show lack of concentration. And it might also be sometimes when we're experiencing really intense emotions, it can make us think in quite black and white terms, and it can make our emotions feel like facts and like proof that my perspective on this is right. So actually, you might have a slight difference of opinion. And if somebody is struggling, for example, with low mood, with anxiety, like they might only see within all of that interaction, all the many things that you might have said that are really helpful and nice and that looked at all the positives, they might really cling to the one thing where they slightly disagree with you, for example. We have this thing called a confirmation bias. So we take in so much information, like all of the time, that it's impossible for our brain to actually process everything. So our brains kind of filter information based on what we think is important, and that will be influenced by all sorts of things. If you're looking to move house, you're now going to notice all the for sale signs up, for example.
Mhm.
You decide you want a Tesla, you're going to notice Teslas everywhere. um Obviously other car brands are available, but whatever it is, like, we then notice those things. If I think my boss doesn't like me, I will notice everything they say that doesn't agree, that's out of sorts with what I personally think, or any tone of voice I'll pick up on as confirmation. We look for the information, not consciously, it's like a subconscious thing, but we look for
Mhm.
evidence that supports the thing we already think and feel. If I feel like I'm useless, I'm no good, I can't do this, I'm going to notice all that evidence. So that not listening, in the depending on what context it is in, can be a real good indicator of how people are feeling within themselves. Essentially, their response, our behaviour is often driven by our emotions. Essentially, timekeeping and attendance as well. Love that. So
Yeah.
it makes it very, very difficult to keep on top of where you're at. So you might see people way earlier than usual, for example, or they're late all the time, or they're just about on time. They aren't coming into work as often. And they won't always necessarily say that I'm off with stress or anxiety. They might be off because of migraines, for example. They might say that they're off because of back pain, because of cold and flus, for example, all of which can be true. Like, our mental health is also very physical. The more stressed we are, the more muscle tension we have, for example. So you will be more likely to get headaches, for example, and be run down. But also, not everyone's going to feel able to be honest to say, actually, I'm struggling with my mental health. And so, actually, they might feel like it's more acceptable to just say, oh, I've got a cold and flu, for example. So, yeah, that sickness might be off. So, making mistakes, that being reactive, or not caring at all, seeming like they're just not bothered whether it goes right or wrong. They don't seem to care if they've done the best piece of work anyone's ever seen. Being tired all the time is a really good sign. Maybe that they're not sleeping, or actually, as well, it's genuinely exhausting when you're not quite yourself, and we're struggling with our mental health. The frequent aches and pains and illnesses. And yeah, changes in communication can be really good indicators. So, like I said, we just want to make a note, like, we all have a bad day, we all have a bad week. That is normal, that is expected. Like we said, loads and loads of things will impact it. That doesn't mean that we can't approach people on that day and make their day easier, for example. But if it's something that you are noticing a bit more, or a bit more ongoing, that might be something for you to, yeah, be aware of, and to just kind of keep track of and check in with people. So then, once we've noticed that something's off, we want to open up a conversation. And again, what we aren't trying to do here is say the right thing or to fix it. It's also important at this point for us to just kind of mention that our brains are also assumption machines. So if, for example, you're a manager and somebody comes to you and says, I'm too overworked, I can't, I'm too busy, I'm really stressed, I don't even know where I'm supposed to start with all of this. Your brain is like to make assumptions about why they've said that, or why they're coming to you about the fact that they're stressed and overwhelmed. You might assume that they're telling you this because they want you to remove some work from their loads, that they don't have to do it. You might assume that it's, they're just putting it on, and it's everyone else is managing it, so why aren't they? Like, what's going on? And what we assume about their intentions, about where this is going, will ultimately impact the way that you then respond to them. So it's just useful to know that our brains are going to do that. It doesn't make you a bad person, doesn't make you an ignorant person. It's what our brains do. And ultimately, that's kind of helped us to survive. But what that won't be helpful for is helping people to feel like you're actually listening to them and you're trying to support them. So all we want to do, like we said, is not aim to say the right thing, to fix everything, to make everything better. For the most part, when people reach out to somebody else, what they want is to just feel like heard, and like you're actually listening, and to feel accepted and not judged for feeling the way that they're feeling and thinking the way that they're thinking. And actually, when people are given a bit of space to work out themselves how they feel, it A, can help calm them down massively in that moment. And B, a lot of the time, it helps them to work out for themselves what they need. And actually, if we, as managers, as someone in a position of trust, jump in too quickly with what might actually be the absolute perfect solution, the best thing you could ever possibly suggest, if it's come straight away from you, unfortunately, sometimes that can also make people feel like you don't feel like they're capable of coming to that conclusion or working it out themselves, or that you feel like you know better, for example. So, like I said, all we want to do is ask open questions. So we're not going to get a closed yes or no short response. We want to just aim to understand better exactly what it is that's going on. And then where we can, we want to validate people's feelings, essentially. So like we said, we want to ask open questions. Open questions often start with like a how or a what. Sometimes why questions can feel a bit like you're challenging people. I feel like, well, why have you done that? Actually, sometimes it's a little bit better to just, oh, I noticed you did that. Um, what was the thought process behind doing that in that way, for example? So like, all we're doing is we're trying to ask questions that, again, don't lead the conversation down a direction that maybe they don't want to take it, for example, or in a way that feels easy for us to manage, or that's in line with where we think this is going anyway. So it might be just 3 simple words, just, how are you? Like, are you okay? Is everything okay? How are you feeling, actually? How are you in yourself? Like, what's going on at the moment? What's adding to this stress in work? And like I said, all we want to do is listen to understand, and to make sure that actually this is what I think it is. This is how they feel. This is what's contributing to it. So again, we are likely, without meaning to kind of make assumptions within ourselves. So for example, if I was to ask Nigel, what does he like doing outside of work?
I,
What might you say, Nigel?
I love watching live sport,
Okay, perfect.
especially
So
rugby.
rugby, right, perfect. So my assumption immediately might be that, I don't know, Nigel always played rugby when he was younger. He um used to, I don't know, he played rugby growing up. He's it's something that he does with his friends. I might jump to all sorts of assumptions about why Nigel likes rugby. And so actually I might then take that line of questioning down a completely different path than where Nigel would like to take it. If actually he wanted to just talk to me about rugby and why he loves rugby. So rather than me assuming Nigel likes rugby because he's always done it, he's always played it, for example, and in which case he actually might have never played rugby, I might instead notice that I think that's where that's going. And I might ask a question instead, like, so what is it about rugby that you enjoy so much?
I like going on a weekend to watch my grandchildren play. They're both playing rugby at the moment for the under sevens.
Perfect. So, had I assumed that Nigel likes rugby for whatever reason that I've already kind of given, I would have completely missed that it's important to
Yeah,
Nigel because that's an opportunity to see his grandchildren play.
correct. Yeah, yeah.
What is it about watching your grandchildren play that means so much to you?
It de-stresses me watching the grandkids and having the grandkids, even though you might be stressed at the time. It's a
Yeah,
good leveler. So I do enjoy watching them. And it's just anything they do, anything with the grandchildren I love. So it's
yeah,
a nice distraction away from work. It's where I get to
lovely.
my levels right, ready for starting afresh on a Monday morning.
Yeah. So it sounds like no matter how you're going into going watching them play rugby, you always leave feeling better and less
Yes.
stressed.
Yeah, yeah.
And you sound really proud when you're talking about them.
Oh, yeah, yeah. Yeah, that's what I live for, my grandchildren. Yeah.
Perfect. So lovely. So all we've done there is just recognise that I'm assuming why Nigel's even saying to me that he likes rugby. And from just recognising that I think I know why he likes rugby and asking instead a couple more questions about that, I've now got like what's quite a nice and also really important bit of information about Nigel and what
Yeah, for sure.
motivates him and what matters to him. And also, even at that point, then he's talking about it. You know, you seem brighter when you're talking about it. You
Yeah,
seem, you lighten up when you're talking about them rather
yeah,
than if I started going on then about the rugby league or the rugby union or
yeah.
the what's it? It's the Six Nations, Four Nations.
No, Six
There's
Nations,
so
you're
many of them,
correct.
isn't
Yeah.
there?
Yeah, yeah.
There's one of them. I don't watch rugby, so yeah.
No.
So like they're just noticing that I think I know what this means. I think I know why he's telling me this. I think I know where this is going. Um, and instead just asking a question about that instead
Yeah.
will give you an awful lot more enlightenment about what is actually going on for that person than me just going, all right, so yes, I take it you watched the whatever was on this weekend, then did you see this match, did you see what's going on in the league at the minute?
Yeah.
We can just get an awful lot better understanding. And when people ask questions like that, it shows that you are doing your best to understand, even if you might get it wrong. Like you're showing that you're trying, you're giving people the sense that you actually care about what they have to say. You're giving them time. You're giving them your energy. So, like, what's that like, Nigel, when people actually show that interest and they actually do ask those kinds of questions?
It's good. You feel good about yourself, and especially when they're asking the right ones, and when they're listening, and you know they're listening because they're following it with another question rather than just saying "Morning, how are you?" and then walking away as you're trying to answer. There's a big
Yeah,
difference between the two.
perfect. So, like, even then, if I was asking Nigel, like, how's your day gone so far?
Today's been quite stressful trying to get across and getting linked up to this link. So at the start of the process of this presentation, yes, I was stressed because the
Yeah,
technology wasn't working as I expected, but
perfect.
it's
So,
fine
me
now.
And me getting that response from Nigel about how it was stressful coming here, I might then automatically assume he's telling me that because he never wants to do this again. He never wants to do another webinar
No,
again.
no,
It's
no,
too
quite the
stressful
opposite.
getting on.
I didn't want to miss
But
it.
yeah, but ultimately, my assumption about he's going to say is because he's trying to get out of it. He don't want to do it again. He finds it too much. I might just say, to him, well, you're just going to have to be more prepared next time. You just
Yeah.
need to, and I jump with some sort of something that I think is going to be a solution that ultimately just means I get this conversation over quicker. If I ask Nigel instead, like, actually, how do you feel now that you're here?
Enjoying it because you get a lot of information, and that's why we like working alongside PMAC. There's a lot of things that we're not aware of, and by these last few presentations that you've done, it's been an eye opener. Yeah, it really has been.
Perfect. So actually, again, me just being a bit more curious about how Nigel is currently might give him the space then to talk about something else. And actually, he might not be stressed now. Like, actually, he might be
No, no.
happy to be here. And if
Yep.
I just immediately jumped into, well, you need to be more organized next time, it's probably not going to feel great
No.
as a result of hearing that. And probably might feel like it's being criticized, talked down to, I'm not interested, and it moves that conversation along.
Mhm.
So, like I said, just aiming to understand makes it much more likely that you're going to have a far more positive impact than you will ever realize than if you assume that you just are supposed to give advice because you're a manager and you're supposed to know the right thing to say, for example. And then the next thing we can do is just make sense of the way that they're feeling at the moment. So, like, now I understand that um, Nigel really loves rugby because it means he gets to spend time with his grandchildren, because he's proud of them, because he loves that time with them, because it's a stress relief, because it then changes how he feels coming into the
Yeah.
next week, regardless of how he felt going into that situation. I can now normalize, like, and make sense of his feelings and how he's thinking from his perspective. If I now am able to make sense, because I've asked those open questions, that Nigel was stressed because of factors that sounded outside of his control and technical issues, for example, I can now make sense of the fact that, yeah, it does make sense that he would feel stressed in that moment. Even if he knows that once he's here, he's going to
Mhm.
enjoy it. It
Yeah.
makes sense that in that moment when so much was going on and he felt he couldn't control it, that in that moment he felt stress. Like, that makes sense. So when we validate how someone's thinking or feeling, what we do is we just kind of show that we understand their perspective. And I'm not trying to fight it. I'm not trying to fix it. I'm not telling them they're wrong. I'm not telling them they're overthinking it. They're being too negative. They need to be more positive. All of which is just further criticism that might reinforce how they feel about themselves. All it does is it just kind of goes, oh, do you know what? Actually, this is understandable. Like, this,
Mhm.
this can be made sense of. And actually, even just naming how somebody else feels in that moment and getting it right because you've actually gone to the effort of understanding can significantly reduce their distress. Even if you're in the middle even of like a really, really overwhelming situation, like, just naming that, just recognizing that and acknowledging that it's there at the minute, and I'm not trying to take it away from you. We all have emotions. We all feel anger and scared and vulnerable and anxious and stressed because we are designed to feel it. It's not a reflection of anyone's abilities. We are just going through emotion we are designed to have, and that also passes. And when we accept that this is just where you're at right now, we give that opportunity almost for them to just kind of not be so worried about the fact that this is how I feel at the minute and this is how I'm thinking, and that means there's something wrong with me and I can't cope. And it then helps to calm them down. So we're not saying I completely wholeheartedly agree with you. And Nigel, I would also feel exactly the same way. And I would take the exact same perspective on that situation. I'm also not disagreeing with you. All I'm doing is just going, I can make sense of why
Yeah.
you were feeling like that in that moment. So, like I said, it helps people to feel less alone. And it helps to show that you actually are going out of your way to try to understand them, which makes them feel like they matter. And it helps them to manage their emotions. It helps to improve trust in you. That communication is going to flow better. And realistically, the reason that you might think in a situation that you wouldn't feel like this and you wouldn't be thinking in that way is because of your experiences. If you had lived every moment of their life and had every bit of feedback and criticism and I don't know, everything a parent told them, a teacher told them, every thought they'd ever had, there is a very, very, very good chance that in this moment you would feel exactly the same. And acknowledging that that's how someone's feeling and normalizing that right now doesn't mean that that means it's okay and it's an acceptable way to respond or that they're completely right. It just means that's how you are now. And it just makes it easier for that to then kind of move along and for that kind of overwhelm to kind of calm down, for example. So the difference being someone, explaining to you that they're really overwhelmed, that they're worried, I feel like I can't do this. I feel like everyone thinks I'm just rubbish and I'm always making mistakes all the time. If you then hear the response, oh God, you're just overreacting, just be positive. Well, you've not exactly helped yourself, have you? When you didn't let the technicians know when the car had come in, or, well, you need to pull your socks up, just get on with it. The rest of us do. We've all got problems. You don't see us moping about. how might you feel kind of hearing stuff like that as a response if you've just shared? And again, that might be a really vulnerable thing to do, actually, that like, I'm feeling really overwhelmed. I'm feeling like I can't do this. I'm feeling like, I'm not doing a very good job here. I'm not good enough. How are you likely to feel? Um, yeah, Nige,
Me,
how would you feel, do you think? Yeah,
it would get you back up, and it'd put you on the defensive straight away. So
yeah.
it put barriers up. It would have the total negative effect to what you're trying to do.
Perfect. Yeah. Might feel hurt, might feel
Yeah,
embarrassed, might feel angry, defensive, might feel ashamed, genuinely. You're probably not going to feel very comfortable letting this manager know again, that you're
yeah,
struggling with anything. The
that's true.
opposite of that is at the minute, like, yeah, no, that does sound really difficult, actually. Like, if I felt genuinely like everyone thought that I am not good at this and I just make mistakes all the time, and I feel really, really overwhelmed, like I can't do it, someone tell me, actually, yeah, that feeling, all of that you're dealing with at the minute does sound overwhelming, is going to make me feel an awful lot calmer, that is, someone's capable of making sense of that, and that feels now like it's understandable, versus being told that I'm wrong for feeling like this in this moment. Because feelings change all of the time, our perspectives change all of the time. When we feel accepted as we are in that moment, it makes it much more easy to kind of pass, rather than us then kind of getting in a tug of war about having to fight this thought with a positive one, even though it doesn't feel like it's true at the minute. So instead, kind of being told, actually, that does sound difficult. I can see why you feel frustrated, to be fair. Like, this sounds exhausting. Like, actually, how are you doing? How have you been managing all of this? Like, this is a lot that you've been managing, and I didn't even realize. Actually, in hindsight, I realized me coming in earlier and just telling you to hurry up probably added to that. So I am sorry. For example, like, all we're doing is showing that I kind of
Yeah,
understand where it is that you're feeling at the minute, and I can make sense of that. That's all we're doing. And the power of that can be enormous, genuinely enormous. And then what we can do, now that we've got a genuine understanding of what's gone on and how they're thinking about it and how they're feeling, and maybe we understand better the response we've seen, whether it's being snappy, they've rung in sick last minute, they've come in 30 minutes late, they're avoiding me, whatever. Now I understand it better, and they feel calmer. I feel a bit calmer as well. As now we can think together. So again, this is the accountability. There's only so much you can do as a manager, but there's also still things that you can do as a manager. And actually, it might have been that if we then think, okay, so what might be useful, what might be helpful, there's a very, very good chance that having done that bit, just the listening, they might now say, well, actually, I feel all right now. I feel better now. I've got that off my chest. That was enough. Like, actually, just that bit can be enough in itself. But it might be that, there are things that they need. And again, often it's kind of small, simple things. It might be, actually, I have been struggling. I have made an appointment with the doctor, but I feel like I can't go because it's like on a Tuesday at 2 o'clock and I'm supposed to be in work. Like, and actually, it might be that they can just have a bit of time to go to the appointment. It might be that they are struggling because genuinely they started at a really busy period. No one really took time to show them exactly how we do things. So now there's quite a bit more time. Maybe we just put them through a little bit of training, or we just show them again, or we observe what they're doing so that we can see if there are any slight adjustments that can be made that make things easy, for example. So it's not often even like the most massive things that people need. But ineffective problem solving can cause massive amounts of distress, and feeling like you're not sure where you're going wrong can add to that massively. So just thinking together, just actually what could be useful, what are the pros and cons of maybe doing that, how likely is that to happen, how are we going to know if this is helping, like what might happen, should we check in again this time in a month? If it's not helpful, we have a think again, we try something else, we start something else, we continue this if that's been useful. And then ultimately, like we said, we're sharing that responsibility. There might be nothing for you to do other than be open to having more conversations. It might be that it's kind of, actually, now that I feel a bit more lighter, I feel relieved, for example. But all we're doing is, like we said, thinking together, rather than it being all on them or all on you. So just to kind of summarize, like, changes to behavior can be a really good indicator of how someone's doing internally and how they're doing in themselves. Work can significantly impact your mental health, as can your manager, but those things can significantly impact things for the better as well. As your stress will benefit, your staff will benefit from looking at processes and reducing stress where we can. That rarely hurts. And we can think quite easily about the processes, like following the MOT method, being accountable for your part in supporting people, but also they are also accountable for doing their bit, such as taking care of their sleep, reaching out to the doctor, whatever that might be. And communication can make a significant difference. Everyone can know where they stand, everyone can know what's expected of them. And just to summarize, the MOT was just making a note of any changes. And it's never too early to check in with people. The earlier the better. Open up the conversation, like we said, with no pressure or expectation that you are going to say the right thing or fix it, but actually just you trying to understand can have far more impact than you realize. And just validating how they feel can have an unbelievable impact. And then thinking together can help people to feel less alone, and also help you to feel a bit more empowered as a manager, to know where you stand and to know what you can expect from your employee, and to know that, you know, things have the potential, I suppose, at this point to change. So with all of that in mind, I just want to thank all of you for having made it here today. You can get a copy of the slides. This is recorded, so you can watch it back. You can share it with anyone else in work that might benefit from it. But like this quote to end, kind of a leader's job isn't to do the work for the people, because we're not swooping in and trying to fix problems, but we're there to help other people figure out for themselves what they need and what they need to get things done to succeed beyond the things that they thought possible. Like, we are capable, the smallest changes are capable of having the biggest impact on our lives longer term. You wouldn't believe it. So yeah, just those small things done well, doing your absolute best, like we said, to just understand, can have such an impact. And yeah, just thank you again to ECS for helping give us the insight into the challenges in the industry, the things that might be useful, for all the work, Nigel, that has gone into putting this together, all the examples, everything that we needed to think about. Hopefully it's been useful and yeah, somewhat relevant to you. And yeah, you are more than welcome to, as we said, share far and wide. We did do other webinars as well. You're welcome to look at them. And yeah, if there's anything that ourselves from a training perspective or ECS can do from their perspective, please do get in touch. But other than that, just thank you so much. Thank you for being here genuinely. It's been really lovely, and like I said, hopefully it's been somewhat useful. And yeah,
I'd like to thank Kaylee and the team at PMAC. Thank you so much for these last few webinars. They've been excellent, and especially to Alice in our office, that's done a lot of work towards this as well. It's been a great collaboration between the two of us. So thank you very much, Hayley.
Yeah, thank you. And you know, one that we might run again as September approaches and that busy period approaches. It is also Mental Health Awareness Week coming up next month as well. So now is a perfect time to be thinking about the well-being of your teams and their mental health. So yeah, strongly encourage you to just look back through the other things we've done. They were all for free. We're not pestering you afterwards or anything like that, but hopefully it's of some use, and it can help people preventatively as well, rather than waiting until people are struggling. But yeah, just thank you all so much. Thank you, Nigel, for persisting and for making it.
Thank you very much.
Many people would have given up, and it would have been completely understandable.
No, I wasn't giving up. I know it was pilot error at the end of the day.
But yeah, no, just really grateful for everyone's time. And yeah, hopefully we'll see some of you again on a future webinar. But enjoy the rest of your week. Do take care of yourselves, and bye for now.
See you later. Bye, everybody. Thank you very much.
Bye, everybody. Take care.
Bye now.